"I'ma translate this paper, wantam sirs," laughed Billionaire, till the poor street girl answered in 5 languages, before continuing, "Please comment on which city you are watching from." The glass towers of Manhattan's financial district pierced the grey winter sky like gleaming spears, each floor a testament to power, wealth, and influence. On the 47th floor of the Al Mansour International Building, Khalid Al Mansour adjusted his silk tie and gazed out at the city below, a concrete jungle where he reigned as one of its most formidable predators. At 35, Khalid had built an empire that spanned continents, oil refineries in the Middle East, tech companies in Silicon Valley, luxury hotels across Europe. His name was whispered in boardrooms from Dubai to New York, with equal parts respect and fear. Today's meeting would cement his position as an untouchable titan of industry, securing a multi-billion-dollar contract that would make him one of the wealthiest men alive. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy. Lawyers in $1,000 suits shuffled papers, while professional translators adjusted their headsets. Everyone knew the stakes. One mistake, one misinterpreted clause, and millions could be lost. Khalid paid these people handsomely for their expertise, and he expected perfection. Outside Oran, the December wind howled through the city streets, carrying with it the forgotten souls who struggled to survive in the shadows of these towering monuments to success. Among them was 8-year-old Aurora, clutching a torn plastic bag containing everything she owned, a few crackers, a worn photograph, and dreams too big for her small, shivering frame. As the two worlds, one of unimaginable privilege, the other of desperate poverty, orbited each other in the same city, neither could have predicted that their paths would collide in the most extraordinary way. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, sometimes it has a sense of justice, and sometimes it simply allows truth to speak through the most unexpected voices. Aurora's small feet barely made a sound as she pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Al Mansour International Building. The warmth hit her like a gentle embrace, a stark contrast to the biting cold she'd endured for the past 3 hours on the streets. Her fingers, numb and purple from the winter air, slowly began to regain feeling as she stood in the marble-clad lobby. The security guard at the front desk was deep in conversation with a delivery man, their voices echoing in the vast space adorned with crystal chandeliers and abstract art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Aurora had learned long ago how to become invisible, a survival skill mastered by those society preferred to forget. She slipped past them, her worn sneakers silent against the polished floor. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to escape the cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. The building felt like a cathedral of wealth, with its soaring ceilings and the quiet hum of prosperity. Aurora had never been inside such a place. Everything gleamed, the elevator doors mean the marble columns. Even the air seemed to shimmer with affluence. As she wandered the ground floor, her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that the single piece of bread she'd found that morning was a distant memory. The plastic bag in her hand contained so little, a photograph of her mother, taken before the accident that changed everything, a few stale crackers she'd saved for later, and a small notebook where she wrote down new words she learned. Aurora had always been different from other street children. While they played or begged, she listened. She absorbed languages like a sponge absorbs water, picking up Polish from the construction workers who sometimes shared their lunch with her, English from the tourists she helped with directions, German from the businessman who gave her $1 after she warned him about pickpockets, French from the chef who let her sleep behind his restaurant on particularly cold nights, and Arabic from the old man at the mosque who taught her to read the Quran. The elevator dinged softly, and curious about the sound, Aurora found herself stepping inside when the doors opened to an empty car. She had never been in an elevator before. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished walls, a small girl with large, intelligent brown eyes, her dark hair tangled and unwashed, her clothes several sizes too large and patched in multiple places. When the elevator stopped at the 47th floor, Aurora hesitated, but the cold was still fresh in her memory, and the warmth of the building called to her like a siren song. She stepped out into a corridor lined with expensive artwork and soft lighting. The voices reached her before she saw the room. Angry, frustrated voices speaking in languages that danced familiar melodies in her ears. Her curiosity, the same trait that had helped her survive on the streets, by understanding the world around her, drew her toward the sound. Through the slightly open door, she glimpsed a scene that seemed almost theatrical. Men and women in expensive clothes gestured wildly, their faces flushed with stress. Papers were scattered across a massive table, and at the head of it all sat a man whose presence commanded the room even in chaos, Khalid al-Mansour. Aurora had heard his name whispered on the streets. The children talked about the wealthy man who lived in the sky, who had more money than entire countries. Looking at him now, she could see why people spoke of him with such awe. He carried himself like royalty, his dark eyes calculating, his movements precise and controlled. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, content to listen to the symphony of languages flowing from the room. Polish mixed with Arabic, English collided with German, and French wove through it all like a golden thread. To others, it might have sounded like chaos. To Aurora, it was music. But as she listened, she began to understand something the adults in the room hadn't noticed, something important hidden in the confusion of voices and foreign words, something that would soon change everything. Inside the conference room, tension crackled like electricity during a thunderstorm. Khalid drummed his manicured fingers against the mahogany table. His patients, wearing thin as lawyers and translators, argued over a single clause that could make or break the deal. The German version says, "exclusive rights," declared Wilhelm Hoffmann, the lead translator, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. But the Arabic translation suggests shared partnership. This discrepancy could cost millions. Khalid's jaw tightened. This contract represented 5 years of negotiations with European energy conglomerates. The deal would establish him as the sole distributor of renewable energy technology across the Middle East, a monopoly worth $12 billion. Every word mattered. Every comma carried weight. Mr. Al-Mansour interrupted his chief legal counsel. Marcus Sterling, perhaps we should postpone until we can clarify these translation errors. The risk, Khalid cut him off sharply, is losing this deal to our competitors. Every hour we delay gives Petrov Industries more time to submit their counteroffer. His accent carried the authority of generations of desert princes, men who had built empires from sand and determination. The room fell silent, except for the whispered consultations between translators. Khalid had built his fortune on calculated risks, on seeing opportunities others missed. But this felt different. The lawyers seemed nervous, the translators uncertain. For a man who controlled every aspect of his empire, uncertainty was an unwelcome visitor. That's when the security guard's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Al-Mansour, we have a situation. There's a street child on your floor. Security cameras show her near your conference room." Khalid's eyes flashed with irritation. "Handle it. I don't pay you to bother me with street beggars." "Sir, she's just a child. Maybe 8 years old. She's not causing trouble, just... I don't care if she's an infant. Remove her. Now." But before the security guard could respond, the conference room door creaked open slightly. All eyes turned toward the entrance as Aurora's small face appeared in the gap. Her large brown eyes took in the scene, the mountain of papers, the frustrated faces, the palpable tension. The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief. How had a street child made it past security? How had she reached the 47th floor? Khalid's face darkened with anger at this breach of his carefully controlled environment. "Security!" he barked into his phone. Aurora should have run. Every instinct told her to flee, to disappear back into the anonymity of the streets where she belonged. But something held her there, perhaps the same curiosity that had helped her survive, or maybe the recognition that this moment was somehow significant. 2 security guards appeared within seconds, their hands reaching for Aurora's thin shoulders. She didn't resist, had learned long ago that fighting only made things worse. But as they began to escort her away, Khalid stood up, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying the amusement of a man who had just thought of an entertaining diversion. The stress of the failed negotiations had put him in a dark mood, and the universe had just delivered him a perfect target for his frustration. The guards paused, still holding Aurora gently but firmly. Khalid picked up the thick contract from the table. 47 pages of legal jargon, technical specifications, and complex clauses written in 5 different languages. "You want to be in my conference room?" Khalid asked Aurora, his voice dripping with mock kindness. Then, earn your place here. He held up the contract, and the room held its breath. Aurora's eyes fixed on the papers, and something flickered in her expression. Not fear, but recognition, as if she was seeing an old friend rather than an impossibly complex legal document. Translate this contract, Khalid announced loudly, ensuring everyone in the room could hear his joke, and I'll give you $1 million. The conference room exploded in laughter. Lawyers doubled over, translators wiped tears from their eyes, and even the security guards struggled to suppress their chuckles. It was absurd, a street child who probably couldn't even read being asked to translate a billion-dollar international contract. But Aurora wasn't laughing. The laughter in the room was like a symphony of condescension, each chuckle another note in a cruel melody that Aurora had heard her entire life, the sound of people who believed that poverty equaled stupidity, that torn clothes meant an empty mind, that a child's circumstances defined her capabilities. Wilhelm Hoffmann, the German translator, was practically wheezing with amusement. Mein Gott, she probably thinks those papers are food wrappers. His colleagues joined in, their expensive educations and professional credentials making them feel superior to this small intruder. Marcus Sterling, the lawyer, shook his head in theatrical disbelief. Mr. Al-Mansour, this is highly irregular. We should focus on the actual translation issues, not waste time with... With what? Khalid interrupted, his eyes gleaming with malicious entertainment. With teaching this little street rat her place in the world. Sometimes, Sterling, education comes in unexpected forms. Aurora stood perfectly still between the two security guards, their hands resting lightly on her shoulders. She could feel their hesitation. These men had families, perhaps children of their own. They were uncomfortable with what was happening, but bound by their employment to follow orders. The contract in Khalid's hands was indeed formidable. 47 pages of dense legal language, technical specifications for renewable energy distribution, complex financial arrangements, and intricate clauses written in Polish, English, German, French, and Arabic. Professional translators had been struggling with it for hours. The idea that an 8-year-old street child could even begin to comprehend it was laughable. But as Aurora's eyes focused on the papers, something remarkable happened. Her breathing slowed, her posture straightened slightly, and her expression changed from that of a frightened child to something else entirely, the look of someone recognizing a familiar challenge. She can't even read, for Christ's sake, muttered one of the junior lawyers, a Harvard graduate named Thompson, who had never spent a night wondering where his next meal would come from. Oh, this is rich, added Sarah Chen, a contract specialist who charged $800 an hour for her expertise. What's next? How are we going to ask the janitor to restructure our corporate hierarchy? The mockery continued to flow around the room like poison gas, but Aurora remained focused on the contract. Her mind, honed by years of survival on the streets, began to process what she saw. The languages seemed to dance off the page, each one telling a slightly different story, and that difference was what the professionals had missed. Khalid waved the contract dramatically, playing to his audience. So come on, little genius, don't disappoint us. Where's your translation? Where's my $1 million investment advice? His voice carried the cruel amusement of a Roman emperor watching gladiators fight for his entertainment. Aurora stepped forward, gently pulling away from the security guards. They looked at each other uncertainly but didn't pursue her. There was something in her movement, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in a child so young, that gave them pause. Mr. Al-Mansour, she said softly, her voice barely audible above the continuing chuckles. May I see the papers, please? The room fell silent so quickly, it was as if someone had pulled a plug on the laughter, not because they expected anything significant, but because the polite formality of her request was so unexpected. Street children were supposed to be crude, desperate, demanding. They weren't supposed to say please with the same careful pronunciation as someone who had been raised in drawing rooms. Khalid's eyebrows rose slightly. The child's English was not only clear, but carried no trace of the broken grammar he expected from someone of her circumstances. Still, he was committed to his cruel theatre. Of course, my dear little translator, he said, extending the contract with exaggerated courtesy. Take all the time you need. We have nothing but patience for your expertise. Aurora took the papers carefully, her small hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was holding. 47 pages of someone's dreams, ambitions, and future. She had learned to read the stories that lived inside official documents during her time sleeping outside government buildings, listening to people argue about permits and applications. She moved to the large window overlooking the city, where the natural light was better. The adults watched her with the detached curiosity of scientists observing an interesting but ultimately meaningless experiment. Some checked their phones. Others whispered among themselves about how long this charade would continue. But Wilhelm Hoffmann, the senior German translator, found himself studying the child more carefully. There was something about the way she held the papers, the manner in which her eyes moved across the text, that seemed purposeful, as if she actually understood what she was looking at. Aurora began with the Polish section, her lips moving silently as she read. The construction workers who had taught her Polish would have been proud. She had absorbed not just their language but their precision, their attention to detail that kept buildings from falling down. Then she moved to the English version, and her brow furrowed slightly. Here was where the first discrepancy revealed itself. The Polish text mentioned temporary exclusivity, while the English version stated permanent exclusive rights. A small difference in words, a massive difference in meaning. The German section told yet another story. Here, the exclusivity was limited to geographical regions, which contradicted both the Polish and English versions. Wilhelm had been so focused on translating individual clauses that he had missed how they interconnected across languages to create an entirely different contract. Aurora's heart began to race as she realized what she was seeing. This wasn't a simple translation error. This was deliberate. Someone had crafted these discrepancies carefully, hoping that in the chaos of multilingual negotiations, they would go unnoticed until it was too late. The French version was the most subtle trap of all. Hidden in the middle of a clause about environmental compliance was a provision that would transfer 40% of Al Mansour Industries' renewable energy patents to the European consortium, not as part of the partnership, but as a good faith gesture that would become permanent upon signing. But it was the Arabic version that made Aurora's blood run cold. Here, buried in flowery diplomatic language that praised Khalid's vision and business acumen, was a clause that would essentially give the European partners the right to audit and potentially seize any Al Mansour assets deemed connected to the energy sector. Since Khalid's empire had grown organically, with each business connected to the others, this clause could theoretically apply to everything he owned. The adults in the room were growing restless. Some checked their watches. Others whispered about dinner reservations and evening flights. The joke had run its course, and they were ready to return to serious business. "Well," Khalid called out impatiently, "are you going to read all day, or do we get to hear your brilliant analysis?" Aurora looked up from the papers, her young face grave with understanding. She could see the trap so clearly now, a masterpiece of legal deception designed to strip Khalid of everything he had built. The Europeans weren't just seeking a partnership, they were planning a complete takeover. She thought about her mother, who had taught her that intelligence was a gift meant to be shared, not hidden. She thought about the old man at the mosque, who had told her that knowledge came with responsibility. She thought about all the times she had seen powerful people crush those weaker than themselves, and how rarely anyone spoke up. The security guards were shifting uncomfortably. Their supervisor was probably wondering what was taking so long. Khalid's patience was clearly wearing thin, and the assembled lawyers and translators were ready to dismiss this expensive distraction. Aurora took a deep breath and walked back to the conference table. She placed the contract carefully in front of Khalid, her small hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said clearly, "before I translate this contract, you need to know that someone is trying to steal everything you own." The silence that followed Aurora's words was so complete that the distant hum of traffic 47 floors below seemed deafening. Every face in the room turned toward her, expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to something approaching disbelief. Khalid's dark eyes narrowed dangerously. "Excuse me?" "This contract," Aurora said, her small finger tracing the pages. "So it's not what they told you it was. Each language version says something different. They're hoping you won't notice until after you sign." Thompson, the Harvard lawyer, let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, this is precious. The little street urchin thinks she's discovered some grand conspiracy. He turned to Khalid with an indulgent smile. Sir, perhaps we should end this amusing interlude and— Let her speak, Khalid said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that made Thompson's smile falter. Something in the child's tone, the certainty in her voice, had caught his attention. He hadn't built an empire by ignoring potential threats, no matter how unlikely the source. Aurora looked around the room at the sea of skeptical faces, lawyers who had spent years in law school, translators with decades of experience, businessmen who dealt in millions every day. She was 8 years old, dressed in rags, with no credentials except the hard-won wisdom of the streets. But she also knew something they didn't. Survival meant seeing what others missed. The Polish version, she began, her voice gaining strength, says you get temporary exclusive rights to distribute energy technology in Middle Eastern markets. Temporary means it can be taken away. Wilhelm Hoffmann frowned, reaching for his own copy of the Polish text. The word is tymczasowy, which does indeed mean temporary, but in this context, Aurora interrupted gently, it means exactly what it says, but the English version uses permanent exclusive rights. That's not a translation. That's a completely different contract. Marcus Sterling was now studying his documents more carefully, his earlier dismissal replaced by growing concern. The child— She might have a point about the discrepancy. I'm just getting started, Aurora said, moving to stand where everyone could see her clearly. The security guards had stepped back, no longer trying to remove her. Even they sensed that something important was happening. The German version is where it gets really clever, Aurora continued, switching effortlessly to German, as she read directly from the contract. Es wird eine exklusive Partnerschaft in bestimmten geografischen Regionen etabliert. She looked up at Wilhelm. That means exclusive partnership in certain geographical regions, not the blanket exclusivity mentioned in the other versions. Wilhelm's face had gone pale. He began frantically flipping through his translations, comparing versions. Mein Gott, she's right. How did I miss this? Because you were translating pieces, Aurora explained with the patience of someone who had learned to teach herself. Each person only looked at their own language, but contracts aren't puzzles, they're stories, and this story changes depending on which language tells it. Sarah Chen, the contract specialist, was now fully engaged, her earlier mockery forgotten. What about the French version? Aurora's expression darkened. The French version is the worst trap of all. She began reading in flawless French, her accent so precise that it made the adults exchange glances of amazement. Dans l'esprit de partenariat et de bonne foi, Al-Mansour Industries transférera la propriété intellectuelle de 40% de ses brevets de énergie renouvelable au consortium européen. The French translator, Claude Dubois, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up, his face flushed. Mon Dieu, that clause! It's buried in the environmental compliance section, 40% intellectual property transfer. What does that mean in plain English? Khalid demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. It means, Aurora said simply, that when you sign this contract, you automatically give them nearly half of all your renewable energy patents, not as part of a partnership, as a good faith gesture that becomes permanent the moment you sign. The room erupted in chaos. Lawyers began arguing in multiple languages, translators frantically checked their work, and Khalid's face had gone deadly calm, the expression his business rivals had learned to fear above all others. And the Arabic version? He asked Aurora, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Aurora hesitated. This was the most dangerous revelation of all. The Arabic version, it's written very beautifully, with lots of praise for your wisdom and success, but hidden in that praise is something that could destroy everything you've built. She began reading in Arabic, her pronunciation so perfect that Khalid's eyebrows rose in surprise. Even in his anger, he was amazed by this child's linguistic abilities. As she read, his expression grew darker and darker. It says, Aurora translated, that as part of ensuring transparency and mutual trust, the European partners have the right to audit any Al-Mansour assets that could be connected to the energy sector. And since your businesses are all connected, your hotels use energy, your tech companies develop energy solutions, your shipping companies transport energy equipment, they could claim audit rights over everything you own. Marcus Sterling was now frantically making phone calls, his voice urgent as he spoke to his firm's senior partners. Wilhelm Hoffmann looked like he might be sick, realizing how close they had come to advising their client to sign away his empire. "But here's the most clever part," Aurora continued, her voice now commanding the complete attention of every adult in the room. "These aren't mistakes. Look at how carefully the discrepancies are placed, never in obvious sections, always buried in technical language or praise. Someone designed this contract to look like translation errors, while actually being a perfectly legal way to steal your company." Khalid stood slowly, his movements controlled but radiating dangerous energy. Who would do this? Aurora looked at the papers again, studying not just the words but the subtle patterns, the way the clauses were structured. Her mind, sharpened by years of reading people's intentions for survival, began to see the bigger picture. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said quietly, "I think you need to look very carefully at who recommended these translators to you, because whoever planned this knew exactly how your business meetings work. They knew you'd have separate translators for each language. They knew the documents would be reviewed in pieces, not as a whole. This isn't random. This is someone who knows your organization from the inside." The implications of her words hit the room like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a bad contract. This was about betrayal from within Khalid's own organization. Someone he trusted had set him up to lose everything. Thompson, who had been silent since his earlier mockery backfired, finally found his voice. "Mr. Al-Mansour, with respect, we're taking the word of a street child about complex international law. Perhaps we should—" "Perhaps," Khalid interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "You should explain to me how a street child caught something that a room full of Harvard-educated lawyers missed." He turned to look at each person in the room, his gaze lingering on each face. "For no someone in this room, or someone who recommended someone in this room, is working with our European partners to destroy me." Aurora watched the adults, faces carefully, using skills honed by years of reading people's intentions on the dangerous streets. Fear, confusion, and anger were easy to spot, but she was looking for something else: guilt, recognition, the subtle signs of someone who had been caught. "There's one more thing," she said softly. "In the German version, there's a phrase that doesn't belong. Wie die Ratte ist im Loch gefangen. The rat is caught in the hole. It's hidden in a technical specification paragraph where it looks like equipment terminology. But it's not. It's a message." Wilhelm's hands shook as he found the phrase. "She's right. This phrase, it has nothing to do with energy equipment. Someone put it there deliberately." Aurora looked around the room one more time, her young eyes seeing what the adults had missed. Someone in this room knows what that phrase means, and I think they know they've been caught. The tension in the room had shifted from skepticism to something far more dangerous: suspicion. Khalid's eyes moved systematically from face to face, studying each person with the calculated intensity of a predator identifying threats. The child's revelations had transformed what should have been a triumphant business meeting into a hunt for a traitor. Aurora remained standing near the window, the contract still in her small hands. She could feel the weight of adult attention on her, but also something else, the subtle shift in energy that told her someone in this room was fighting to maintain their composure. Someone who hadn't expected a street child to unravel their carefully laid plans. Wilhelm Hoffmann was visibly shaking now, not from guilt, but from the realization of how catastrophically he had nearly failed his client. "Mr. Al-Mansour, I swear to you, I had no idea about these discrepancies. I've been working with the preliminary drafts for weeks, but this final version, someone must have made changes after my initial review." "When did you receive the final version?" Khalid asked, his voice carrying the authority of an interrogation. "This morning," Wilhelm replied. "Claude Dubois and I both received updated versions from—" He stopped, his face paling as he realized the implication of what he was about to say. "From whom?" Khalid's voice was deadly quiet. "From your assistant, Mr. Petrov," Wilhelm finished reluctantly. "He said you wanted final translations completed urgently." All eyes turned to Marcus Sterling, Khalid's chief legal counsel, who had been unusually quiet during Aurora's revelations. But it wasn't Sterling who reacted. It was Sarah Chen, the contract specialist, whose normally composed expression had cracked slightly. Aurora noticed it first. The way Sarah's breathing had changed, how her hands had moved unconsciously to her phone, the micro-expression of someone calculating escape routes. Living on the streets had taught Aurora to read these signs of danger. to spot the moment when someone shifted from innocent to threatened. "Ms. Chen," Aurora said quietly, "you look upset." Sarah's laugh was too sharp, too quick. "Upset? I'm amazed, darling. Amazed that we're taking legal advice from someone who probably learned to read from garbage cans." But Khalid had noticed Aurora's observation, and his attention focused on Sarah like a laser. "You recommended these translators, didn't you?" "Sarah? I recommended the best available professionals for a contract of this magnitude," Sarah replied, but there was a defensive edge to her voice that hadn't been there before. "Wilhelm and Claude are both highly respected in their fields." "That's not what I asked," Khalid said, moving closer to her. "I asked if you recommended them specifically for this contract." Aurora was watching the interaction with the intense focus of someone who had learned that missing subtle cues could mean the difference between safety and danger. She noticed how Sarah's eyes kept darting to her phone, how her posture had shifted toward the door, how her usual professional confidence was cracking under pressure. "Mr. Al-Mansour," Aurora said softly, "may I ask Ms. Chen a question?" Khalid nodded, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Aurora looked directly at Sarah, her young voice clear and innocent. "Ms. Chen, what does Die Ratte ist im Loch gefangen mean to you?" Sarah's reaction was instant and devastating. For just a fraction of a second, her professional mask slipped completely, revealing recognition, fear, and fury. She recovered quickly, but in a room full of people now alert to deception, that moment was enough. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "That's interesting," Aurora replied thoughtfully, "because your face says you understand perfectly, and you reached for your phone when I said it, like you wanted to text someone." Thompson was staring at his colleague in growing horror. "Sarah, what's going on? You're acting strange." Marcus Sterling had gone very still, his legal mind processing the implications. "Sarah, how long have you been working on this contract?" "Since the beginning," Sarah snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Since Khalid decided he was too good to work with American partners and started chasing after European deals that—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she had revealed too much. The room fell silent except for the sound of her rapid breathing. Khalid's voice was soft now, which everyone in the room understood was far more dangerous than his anger. "That's interesting, Sarah, because this contract wasn't with the Europeans I've been negotiating with for 5 years. This was a completely separate deal, with different partners, different terms. The only way you could know about my European deals is if you've been tracking all of my negotiations." Aurora watched as Sarah's face cycled through emotions: defiance, fear, calculation, and finally, resigned fury. "You have no idea how many people you've destroyed," Sarah said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "How many American companies have gone bankrupt because you decided to take your business overseas? How many jobs you've cost this country? So you decided to cost me my company." Khalid's voice remained dangerously calm. "I decided to stop a traitor," Sarah spat. "You made your fortune in America, with American investors, American lawyers, American infrastructure. And then you turn around and hand billion-dollar contracts to Europeans. You're nothing but a—" "A what?" Khalid interrupted. "Go ahead, Sarah. Say what you're really thinking." Sarah's face flushed with rage and something uglier. "You're a foreigner who came here and stole opportunities that should have gone to real Americans. This country made you rich, and you repay us by shipping jobs overseas." The racism underlying her betrayal was now explicit, filling the room with uncomfortable silence. Aurora had heard this kind of hatred before, on the streets, but never delivered with such polished vengeance. Wilhelm and Claude were staring at Sarah in shock, realizing they had been unwitting pawns in her scheme. Thompson looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. The security guards shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they should intervene. "The European Consortium," Khalid said, piecing it together. "They were never legitimate partners, were they? They were your creation." Sarah's laugh was bitter now, all pretense abandoned. "Petrov Industries is very real, Mr. Al-Mansour, and they were very interested in acquiring your company at a fraction of its value after you signed away your rights with this contract. All it would have taken was your signature on those papers, and they could have legally claimed ownership of everything you've built." "And you?" Khalid asked. "What did you get out of destroying me?" $20 million, Sarah said with defiant pride. and the satisfaction of watching you lose everything, just like you made so many American companies lose everything. Aurora had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. The adult world was so much more complex and ugly than she had imagined. But one thing puzzled her. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "if you wanted to steal from Mr. Al-Mansour, why did you make the clues so obvious? The phrase in German, the contradictions between languages, it's almost like you wanted someone to figure it out." Sarah's expression shifted to something approaching respect for the child's insight. "Because I wanted him to know. What's the point of revenge if your victim doesn't understand what's happening to them? I wanted Khalid to realize, in that moment when it was too late to stop, exactly who had destroyed him and why. But it is too late," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "You may have figured out the contract, but the damage is done. Petrov Industries has already filed preliminary claims based on our good faith negotiations. Your reputation in the international energy market is finished. No one will trust you now." Khalid smiled then, a cold expression that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "Sarah, there's something you didn't count on." "What?" "I record all my business meetings," he said simply. "Every word you've just spoken, every admission of fraud, conspiracy, and yes, racism. It's all been recorded and automatically backed up to secure servers." Sarah's face went white as the implications hit her. "And," Khalid continued, "since this meeting involves international fraud, the FBI will be very interested in our conversation. Conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, wire fraud, and violation of several international trade laws. You're looking at 20 years in federal prison." Aurora watched as Sarah's defiance crumbled into desperation. The woman who had tried to destroy a man's empire was now facing the destruction of her own life. But what struck Aurora most was the waste of it all that intelligence, all that legal skill, used for hatred and revenge instead of building something good. As security guards who were not Sarah's allies entered the room, as FBI agents were called, as the complex machinery of justice began to turn, Aurora found herself thinking about a different kind of power. Not the power to destroy, but the power to save. Not the power that came from hatred, but the power that came from unexpected places. The street child had saved the billionaire's empire. But what would happen next would determine whether that salvation meant anything at all. As the FBI agents escorted Sarah Chen from the building in handcuffs, the conference room fell into a strange, heavy silence. The remaining lawyers and translators sat in stunned disbelief, processing how close they had all come to participating in the destruction of Khalid's empire. Wilhelm Hoffman kept shaking his head, muttering apologies in 3 languages, while Claude Dubois stared at the contract pages as if they might reveal more hidden secrets. Aurora remained by the window, still holding the documents that had contained so much deception. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, and she was beginning to feel like what she was. An 8-year-old child who had wandered into an adult world of betrayal and billion-dollar conspiracies. Her small hands trembled slightly as she carefully placed the papers on the table. Khalid dismissed the remaining professionals with curt nods and generous severance payments, partly for their discretion, partly out of recognition that they too had been victims of Sarah's scheme. Soon, only Khalid, Aurora, and the 2 security guards remained in the vast conference room. "You can go," Khalid told the guards, "and close the door behind you." When they were finally alone, Khalid turned his full attention to the small girl who had just saved his empire. She looked even smaller now in the enormous room, her torn clothes and tangled hair a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding them. But her eyes, those intelligent brown eyes, held a depth that seemed far beyond her years. "Aurora," Khalid said softly, testing her name for the first time. He had heard one of the security guards use it when checking on her earlier. "That's your name, isn't it?" She nodded, surprised that he knew it. "It means dawn," he continued. "The first light after darkness." How appropriate. He moved closer, studying her with genuine curiosity rather than the cruel amusement he had shown earlier. "Where did you learn to speak so many languages?" Aurora's voice was barely above a whisper. "On the streets. You learn what you need to survive. And reading legal documents. Where does a child learn to understand contracts?" "From watching," she said simply. "I used to sleep outside the courthouse when it was warm. People would argue about papers, and I'd listen. After a while, you start to understand how words can mean different things depending on who's using them." Khalid felt something unexpected. Shame. Here was a child who had been sleeping outside buildings while he complained about the thread count in his Egyptian cotton sheets. A child who had educated herself by listening to legal arguments while he paid thousands of dollars for consultants to explain basic concepts. "You saved my company today," he said quietly. "Do you understand what that means?" Aurora looked around the luxurious room, then back at Khalid. "It means you get to keep being rich." Despite everything, Khalid found himself smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in months. "Yes, I suppose it does. It also means that thousands of people get to keep their jobs, that renewable energy projects in a dozen countries can continue, that—" He stopped, realizing he was explaining global economics to a hungry child. "Aurora," he said, his tone becoming serious, "I made you a promise earlier. I said if you could translate that contract, I'd give you $1 million. I was joking then, being cruel. But you did far more than translate it. You saved everything I've built." Aurora's eyes widened. She had honestly forgotten about his mocking promise in the chaos that followed. "However," Khalid continued, "giving $1 million in cash to an 8-year-old would create complications, legal issues, tax problems, and frankly, it wouldn't be safe for you on the streets with that much money." Aurora nodded, not really understanding the complexities, but sensing that he was trying to explain something important. "So I want to make you a different offer," Khalid said, pulling out his phone. "I want to change your life entirely, but only if you want me to." For the first time since entering the building, Aurora looked genuinely frightened. Adults who wanted to change your life were usually social workers, and social workers meant foster homes, and foster homes meant uncertainty at best. Khalid noticed her fear and sat down, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "I'm not talking about taking you away from your independence," he said gently. "I'm talking about giving you choices you've never had before." He showed her his phone, where he had pulled up information about elite boarding schools, private tutors, university programs for gifted children. "You have an extraordinary mind, Aurora. The kind of intelligence that could change the world if it's properly developed. I want to give you every educational opportunity that exists." Aurora stared at the images on his phone. Beautiful campuses, libraries that looked like palaces, students in clean uniforms carrying books instead of plastic bags. It looked like a fairy tale. "But why?" she asked. "I'm nobody. I'm just a street kid." "No," Khalid said firmly. "You're the person who saw what a room full of experts missed. You're someone who learned 5 languages just by listening. You're a child who chose to help a stranger even after he was cruel to you." He paused, his voice becoming softer. "And maybe I've spent so much time building an empire that I forgot empires should stand for something beyond just making money." Aurora was quiet for a long moment, processing this offer that seemed too good to be real. "What if I'm not as smart as you think? What if I can't learn the things rich kids learn?" Khalid's laugh was warm now, completely different from his earlier cruelty. "Aurora, you just prevented international corporate espionage. I think you can handle algebra." But even as she felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest, Aurora hesitated. "Mr. Al-Mansour, what about other kids like me? There are lots of children on the streets who are smart, who just need someone to give them a chance." The question stopped Khalid cold. In his excitement about Aurora's potential, he had focused entirely on her individual situation, but she was thinking beyond herself, considering the broader injustice of wasted potential in children who would never get the opportunities he was offering her. "You're right," he said slowly. "Oh, there are others." Aurora looked directly at him, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "If you really want to change my life, then let me help you change other lives too. Don't just save one street kid, save as many as we can." Khalid stared at this remarkable child who was already thinking like a philanthropist, like someone who understood that true success meant lifting others up rather than just climbing higher yourself. At 8 years old, she had grasped something that had taken him 35 years to learn. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "A school," Aurora said, her excitement growing as the idea took shape. "Not just for rich kids, but for street kids who are smart, but never had chances. Kids who speak different languages because they had to, who understand math because they had to count money for food, who know science because they had to figure out how to stay warm. A school for gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds," Khalid mused, his business mind already calculating possibilities. Full scholarships, comprehensive support, preparation for universities, and jobs, Aurora added. Real jobs afterward, so they can help their families and their communities. Khalid felt something shifting inside him, a realization that all his wealth and power had been building toward this moment without him knowing it. Aurora, what you're describing, it would cost millions of dollars, tens of millions. Aurora looked at him with the simple logic of a child who had learned to solve problems with whatever resources were available. Mr. Al-Mansour, you almost lost billions of dollars today. Spending millions to help kids like me seems like a good investment. You're absolutely right, Khalid said, and meant it completely. But Aurora, I want you to understand something. If we do this, if we build this school, if we create these opportunities, it won't be charity. It will be partnership. You won't just be the first student. You'll help design the program, help select other students, help make decisions about how it operates. Aurora's eyes were bright with tears now, but they were tears of joy rather than fear. You mean it? Really, I mean it, Khalid said solemnly. We'll start with you. Make sure you have everything you need to develop your incredible gifts. And then together, we'll build something that gives other children the same chances. Aurora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving small streaks on her dirty cheeks. There's one more thing, she said quietly. What? Promise me that no matter how successful this school becomes, no matter how famous or important it gets, we'll never forget that it started because someone was cruel to a hungry child, and that child chose to help anyway. Khalid felt his throat tighten with emotion. This 8-year-old girl was teaching him about grace, about forgiveness, about using painful experiences to create something beautiful rather than seeking revenge. I promise, he said. We'll make sure every student who comes through our school understands that knowledge is a gift meant to be shared, that intelligence without compassion is worthless, and that the greatest transformations often come from the most unexpected places. As the winter sun began to set over Manhattan, casting golden light through the conference room windows, a billionaire and a street child shook hands on an agreement that would change both their lives forever. Neither of them realized it yet, but they were also shaking hands on something that would eventually change the lives of thousands of other children who were still waiting, somewhere in the shadows of the city, for their own moment of unexpected salvation. 6 months after that transformative winter day, the penthouse of the Al-Mansour International Building had been converted into something unprecedented, a state-of-the-art educational facility that bridged the gap between a child's immediate needs and their unlimited potential. Aurora stood in what had once been Khalid's private dining room, now transformed into a language lab where she was helping 3 other children navigate the complexities of legal translation. The key, Aurora explained to Maria, a 10-year-old from El Salvador who spoke fluent Spanish and was learning English, is understanding that words carry different weights in different cultures. When this contract says partnership in English, it might mean something completely different in Spanish depending on the context. Aurora had grown in remarkable ways during these months. Proper nutrition had filled out her small frame, and regular sleep had brought energy to her movements. But the most striking change was her confidence. She carried herself now like someone who belonged in rooms filled with important conversations, because she had learned that intelligence and insight were more valuable than expensive clothes or prestigious backgrounds. Khalid watched from the doorway, still amazed by the transformation in both Aurora and himself. The school they had envisioned was becoming reality faster than either had dared hope. They had started with Aurora and 3 other children. Maria, who had been surviving by translating for immigrant families. David, a 12-year-old from Detroit whose mathematical genius had been discovered when he started calculating betting odds for street gamblers. And Lynn, a 9-year-old from Chinatown who could identify patterns in complex data sets by observation alone. Mr. Al-Mansour, Aurora called out, having noticed him watching. Claire, could you help us with something? Khalid entered the room, still adjusting to being addressed so casually by children who saw him as a teacher and mentor rather than an intimidating billionaire. What can I help with? We're working on a practice contract, David explained, his voice carrying the precision of someone who thought in numbers. But the financial projections don't match up across the different language versions. We think someone made deliberate errors, like what happened with Mrs. Chen, Lynn added quietly. She was the shyest of the 4 children, but her analytical mind was perhaps the sharpest Khalid had ever encountered. Khalid smiled at their reference to Sarah Chen, who was now serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison. The children had all learned about that case study as part of their curriculum, not to frighten them, but to help them understand how intelligence could be used for destructive purposes and why they had a responsibility to use their gifts wisely. "Show me what you found," Khalid said, pulling up a chair. This had become one of his favorite parts of each day, the moment when the children would present problems they had discovered and solutions they had developed. As the 4 children walked him through their analysis, Khalid found himself thinking about how much his life had changed since Aurora first stepped into his conference room. The Al Mansour Foundation for Gifted Youth had officially launched 3 months ago, with an initial endowment of $50 million and plans to open physical campuses in 5 major cities within 2 years. But more than the institutional changes, Khalid had experienced a personal transformation that still surprised him. He woke up each morning excited to see what discoveries the children would make, what questions they would ask, what problems they would solve. His business empire continued to thrive. If anything, his reputation had been enhanced by the attempted corporate espionage scandal and his innovative response to it. But his success felt meaningful now in a way it never had before. "The pattern we found," Aurora was explaining, "to suggest that someone is testing whether companies actually read their contracts carefully, like they're gathering data on which businesses can be manipulated." "That's a sophisticated analysis," Khalid said, genuinely impressed. "What do you think we should do with this information?" "Report it to the FBI," Maria said immediately. "Mrs. Rodriguez taught us that when we find evidence of crimes, we have a responsibility to share it with authorities." Miss Rodriguez was their ethics instructor, a former prosecutor who had joined the foundation specifically to help gifted children understand the moral implications of their abilities. "But first," David added, "we should document everything thoroughly and make sure our analysis is bulletproof. The authorities will take us more seriously if we present our findings professionally. And we should consider whether this company has victimized other businesses," Lynn said quietly. "If we can identify a pattern, we might be able to help prevent future crimes." Khalid nodded approvingly. These children weren't just intellectually gifted, they were developing the ethical framework and practical wisdom to use their gifts responsibly. "Excellent reasoning, all of you. Why don't you prepare a formal presentation for tomorrow? We'll invite some FBI contacts to review your findings." As the children excitedly began planning their presentation, Khalid's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Al-Mansour, the mayor's office is on line 1. Something about the foundation's expansion proposal." Khalid had submitted plans to open the foundation's first full campus in Brooklyn, focusing on recruiting gifted children from underserved communities throughout New York City. The political response had been overwhelmingly positive. Politicians loved being associated with innovative educational initiatives, especially ones that didn't require taxpayer funding. "I'll take it in my office," Khalid said, then turned back to the children. "Keep working on that analysis. Aurora, could you join me when you're finished here?" 20 minutes later, Aurora knocked on Khalid's office door. She still felt a little intimidated by the space. It was larger than most apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. But Khalid had worked hard to make her feel comfortable there, replacing his intimidating CEO desk with a round conference table where they could sit as equals. "Good news from the mayor's office," Khalid said as Aurora settled into her chair. "They're approving our campus proposal and offering additional support, transportation vouchers for students, partnerships with existing schools for accredited coursework, even connections with child services to help identify candidates." Aurora's face lit up with excitement. "Really? We can start recruiting more kids. We can start recruiting dozens more kids," Khalid confirmed. "The campus will accommodate up to 200 students initially, with plans for expansion based on results." Aurora was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what they were building. 200 children who might otherwise remain trapped in cycles of poverty, their potential never recognized or developed. 200 young minds that would be given every opportunity to flourish and contribute to society. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said thoughtfully, "do you ever worry that we're moving too fast? That we might not be able to help all these children the way we want to?" It was a mature question from someone who had learned to think systematically about complex problems. Khalid had wondered the same thing himself, whether their rapid expansion might compromise the quality of education and support they could provide. "I worry about it every day," he admitted, "but I've also learned that perfect planning can become an excuse for inaction. We have good principles, dedicated staff, and enough resources to start strong. We'll learn and improve as we grow. And we have something else," Aurora added with a small smile. "We have kids like us to help design the program. We know what it's like to be overlooked, to have potential that nobody recognizes. We won't make the same mistakes that traditional schools make." Khalid marveled again at her wisdom. Aurora had become far more than his first student. She was his partner in creating something revolutionary. Her insights shaped curriculum decisions, her empathy guided support services, and her understanding of disadvantaged children's needs ensured the foundation remained true to its mission. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Khalid said, pulling out a folder. "I've been approached by several international organizations. They want to replicate our model in other countries: London, Dubai, Singapore, Sao Paulo." Aurora's eyes widened. "You mean kids all over the world could have schools like ours?" "Potentially, yes, but it would mean more responsibility for both of us. Travel, training programs for international staff, adapting our methods to different cultures and languages." Aurora was quiet for several minutes, looking out at the city where her new life had begun. Somewhere down there were other children like she had been, hungry, overlooked, brilliant minds trapped in circumstances beyond their control. The thought of reaching even more of them was exciting but also overwhelming. "Can I ask you something?" Aurora said finally. "Of course. When you were building your business empire before you met me, did you ever imagine that your success would lead to something like this?" Khalid considered the question carefully. "I know," he said honestly. "I thought success meant accumulating more money, more companies, more power. I never understood that the real purpose of success might be giving other people the opportunity to succeed. I used to dream about having enough food and a warm place to sleep," Aurora said. "I never imagined I'd be helping other kids get opportunities. I never thought I could have myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought them together and the even more unlikely future they were building. "So," Khalid said finally, "are you ready to help change the world?" Aurora smiled, the same bright expression that had first appeared when she realized she could help save his company. "Mr. Al-Mansour, I think we already started." 1 year after their first meeting, Aurora stood on a stage in the newly opened Al-Mansour Foundation campus in Brooklyn, addressing an audience of educators, philanthropists, city officials, and most importantly, 50 newly enrolled students who had been selected from over 3,000 applicants across New York City. The transformation was remarkable. The girl who had once worn torn clothes and carried her possessions in a plastic bag now wore a crisp school uniform. But more significantly, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her voice mattered. Her speech was being broadcast live to similar ceremonies in London, Dubai, and Singapore, where sister campuses were preparing to open their doors. "When I first walked into Mr. Al-Mansour's office building," Aurora began, her clear voice carrying easily through the auditorium, "I was just trying to get warm. I never imagined that seeking shelter would lead to discovering that intelligence isn't about where you come from. It's about how you choose to use your mind." In the front row, Khalid watched with pride as his former homeless 8-year-old partner delivered a speech that was being quoted in real time on social media and would be featured in educational journals worldwide. But he wasn't just proud of Aurora's poise or eloquence. He was proud of the substance of what she was saying, the wisdom she had developed through their work together. "This school exists because we believe every child deserves the chance to discover their potential," Aurora continued. "But potential isn't enough by itself. We also need purpose. The question isn't just, how smart are you? The question is, how will you use your intelligence to make the world better?" The audience of new students was completely engaged. These children, selected not just for intellectual ability, but for resilience, creativity, and demonstrated capacity to overcome challenges, saw themselves reflected in Aurora's story. They understood that this opportunity came with responsibility. "I want to tell you about some of the students who came before you," Aurora said, moving to the examples that had become central to the Foundation's culture. Maria Gonzalez, who started here speaking only Spanish, now helps immigrant families navigate legal documents in 3 languages while studying international law. David Washington, whose mathematical genius was discovered on the streets of Detroit, has developed algorithms that help predict and prevent infrastructure failures in low-income neighborhoods. Aurora's presentation included video messages from graduates who are now enrolled in prestigious universities with full scholarships, working at leading companies, or launching their own social enterprises. But more than their individual success, she emphasized how they were using their opportunities to create change in their communities. Lin Chen, Aurora continued, who was so shy when she first arrived that she barely spoke in class, now runs data analysis for a non-profit that matches homeless individuals with appropriate services. Her work has helped over 2,000 people find permanent housing. The impact statistics were impressive. 98% of foundation graduates gained admission to top universities, 87% returned to work in underserved communities, and collectively they had launched 34 social enterprises, addressing problems in education, healthcare, environmental sustainability, and economic development. But Aurora knew the numbers only told part of the story. The real measure of our success, she said, isn't how much we achieve for ourselves. It's how many other people we help achieve their potential too. After the formal ceremony, Aurora joined Khalid and the Foundation's board of directors for a private reception. The board now included former students like Maria and David, ensuring that the organization remained connected to its mission as it grew. Aurora, said Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Foundation's academic director, your presentation today was outstanding, but I'm curious, how do you think we should handle our success? We're getting requests from dozens of cities, multiple countries, even international development organizations want to partner with us. It was a serious question. The Foundation's model had proven so effective that replication requests were arriving faster than they could be properly evaluated. Aurora had become instrumental in these strategic decisions, her unique perspective helping the leadership team maintain focus on their core mission while pursuing sustainable growth. I think, Aurora said thoughtfully, so we need to remember why we started this. It wasn't to create the world's largest educational organization. It was to make sure kids like I was don't get overlooked. She paused, collecting her thoughts in the same careful way she had learned to analyze complex problems. Every time we expand, we should ask ourselves, are we still finding the children who need us most? Are we still providing them with not just education, but with the support and community they need to thrive? Are we still teaching them that their success should lift up others? Khalid nodded approvingly. These were the same principles they had established during their first conversations, but Aurora's ability to articulate them clearly had helped the entire organization stay aligned with its founding values. There's something else, Aurora added. I've been thinking about the children we're not reaching yet. We focus a lot on intellectually gifted kids, which is important, but what about children who are gifted in other ways? Artistic kids, kids with emotional intelligence, kids who are natural leaders but don't test well academically. It was a sophisticated insight that had emerged from Aurora's own experiences, working with diverse groups of children. She had observed that traditional definitions of giftedness often missed children whose talents manifested in non-academic ways. Dr. Warren leaned forward with interest. Are you suggesting we expand our admission criteria? I'm suggesting we expand our understanding of potential, Aurora replied. Some of the smartest people I knew on the streets couldn't read well, but they understood people. They could solve complex social problems. They had gifts that schools never recognized. Maria, now serving as the Foundation's student recruitment coordinator, added her perspective. Aurora's right. When we only focus on academic metrics, we miss kids who could contribute in crucial ways. Street children often develop leadership abilities, emotional resilience, creative problem-solving skills that are just as valuable as test scores. The conversation continued for another hour, with Aurora contributing insights that shaped the Foundation's next phase of development. Watching her, Khalid reflected on how much they had both changed since that first encounter in his conference room. He had discovered that true success wasn't measured in billions of dollars or corporate acquisitions, but in the number of lives transformed, the amount of potential unleashed, the degree to which his work contributed to human flourishing. The Foundation had become his most important legacy, more meaningful than any business deal he had ever closed. Aurora had discovered something equally profound, that her intelligence was not just a tool for personal survival, but a gift with the power to create systematic change. She had learned to think beyond her own circumstances, to see patterns of injustice and envision solutions that could help entire communities. As the reception wound down, Aurora and Khalid found themselves alone on the campus balcony, looking out over Brooklyn's diverse neighborhoods where many of their students lived. "Do you ever miss it?" Khalid asked quietly. "The simplicity of your life before all this responsibility?" Aurora considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the freedom," she admitted. "When you're responsible only for yourself, decisions are easier. But I don't miss the helplessness. I don't miss watching other kids struggle and knowing I couldn't help them. And now I know that every child we help will go on to help others. It's like exponential hope." She smiled at her mathematical metaphor. "David taught me that term," Khalid chuckled. "Exponential hope, I like that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as evening approached. Somewhere in those neighborhoods were the next group of children who would benefit from what they had built together. Children who didn't yet know that their circumstances would not define their futures. "Mr. Al-Mansour," Aurora said finally, "thank you for keeping your promise." "Which promise?" "To never forget that this started with someone being cruel to a hungry child, and that child choosing to help anyway." Khalid felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever Aurora reminded him of the moral foundation underlying all their work. "Thank you for teaching me what my success should actually be used for." As they prepared to leave the campus where tomorrow 50 new students would begin their transformative journeys, both Aurora and Khalid understood that they were no longer the same people who had met in that conference room. They had become partners in something larger than either could have imagined, a movement that was proving every day that potential exists in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone to recognize it and help it flourish. The girl who had once sought shelter from the cold had become a beacon of hope for thousands of other children. The billionaire who had once cared only about profit margins had discovered that his greatest return on investment would always be measured in human lives transformed. 3 years after their first meeting, Aurora received a phone call that would test everything she and Khalid had built together. She was now 11 years old, serving as student ambassador for the Al-Mansour Foundation's global network of 12 campuses, when FBI agent Patricia Collins contacted her directly. "Aurora, we need your help," Agent Collins said during their secure video call. "We've uncovered something that connects directly to your original case with Sarah Chen. It's bigger than we initially thought." Aurora was in Khalid's office when the call came through, working on expansion plans for their newest campus in Mumbai. Khalid joined the conversation, his expression growing grave as Agent Collins explained the situation. "We've discovered that Sarah Chen was part of a larger network, an international consortium that specializes in corporate espionage targeting successful immigrants and minority business owners. They've been operating for over a decade, and we estimate they've stolen or destroyed over $2 billion in assets." Aurora felt a chill run through her. "You mean there are other people like Mr. Al-Mansour who lost everything?" "Worse," Agent Collins continued, "there are dozens of successful businesses owned by immigrants that have been systematically destroyed. The pattern is always the same: infiltrate the organization, create fraudulent contracts, and then use the legal system to strip away ownership and assets." Khalid's jaw tightened. "What do you need from us?" "The network is planning their largest operation yet. They're targeting the Patel Technology Group, a family business that employs over 8,000 people and specializes in medical device manufacturing. If they succeed, it won't just destroy the Patel family. Thousands of jobs will disappear, and several critical medical research projects will be abandoned." Aurora leaned forward, her mind already processing the implications. "Agent Collins, what makes this case different? Why can't you stop them using normal law enforcement methods?" "Because they've learned from Sarah Chen's mistakes. The contracts are more sophisticated now, the legal traps are harder to detect, and they're using multiple law firms across several countries to obscure their activities. We need someone who can see the patterns the way you did 3 years ago." The weight of the request settled over Aurora like a heavy cloak. The FBI was asking an 11-year-old girl to help prevent an international crime that could affect thousands of lives. It was simultaneously the ultimate validation of her abilities and a terrifying responsibility. There's something else, Agent Collins added. The Patel family has a daughter, Priya, who's 14 years old. She's been working with her father's company since she was 10, learning the business. If this conspiracy succeeds, she'll lose not just her family's legacy, but her own future. Aurora looked at Khalid, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. They had built the foundation to help children like Priya, to ensure that intelligence and hard work weren't destroyed by hatred and greed. "We'll help," Aurora said without hesitation, "but I want something in return." Agent Collins raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "When we expose this network, I want the FBI to commit to working with our foundation to identify other businesses that might be targeted. We can train our students to recognize these patterns, create an early warning system to protect immigrant-owned companies." Khalid smiled proudly. Even under pressure, Aurora was thinking systematically about long-term solutions rather than just immediate problems. "Done," Agent Collins agreed. "Can you be in Washington tomorrow? We'll provide you with the Patel contracts and everything we know about the conspiracy network." After ending the call, Aurora and Khalid sat in silence for several minutes. The stakes had never been higher. They weren't just trying to save one company, but to dismantle an entire criminal organization that had been destroying immigrant communities for years. "Are you ready for this?" Khalid asked gently. "You're still a child, Aurora. No one would blame you if you decided this was too much responsibility." Aurora stood up, moving to the window where she could see the Brooklyn campus in the distance. Hundreds of children were down there right now, developing their talents, learning to use their gifts responsibly, preparing to make positive changes in the world. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said, turning back to face him. 3 years ago, I was just trying to get warm. Now I have the chance to protect thousands of families from losing everything they've built. If I don't help when I can, what was the point of everything we've accomplished?" Khalid stood as well, extending his hand for a handshake that had become their traditional way of marking important commitments. "Partners?" he asked. "Partners?" Aurora confirmed, grasping his hand with steady determination. "Let's go save some dreams." 6 months later, Aurora stood in a federal courthouse as the final members of the International Conspiracy Network received their sentences. The investigation had uncovered crimes spanning 12 countries and resulted in the recovery of over $1.8 billion in stolen assets. More importantly, it had dismantled a system of organized hatred that had destroyed countless immigrant families' dreams. Priya Patel sat in the gallery beside her parents, their family business not only saved, but stronger than ever. The media attention from the case had brought them new contracts and partnerships, proving that excellence could triumph over prejudice when good people chose to act. "This case represents more than successful law enforcement," the federal judge stated during the final sentencing. "It demonstrates what's possible when intelligence is guided by compassion, when success is measured by service to others, and when society recognizes that potential exists in the most unexpected places." Aurora had become more than a gifted child who helped solve crimes. She had become a symbol of transformation, proof that circumstances of birth need not determine limits of achievement. The Al-Mansour Foundation now operated in 18 countries, had graduated over 3,000 students, and maintained a 97% success rate in university placement. But statistics couldn't capture the real victory. A generation of young people who understood that their talents came with responsibilities, that true success meant lifting others up, and that the most powerful force in the world was intelligence applied with purpose. Khalid, now internationally recognized as a leader in educational philanthropy, had discovered that helping others achieve their potential was infinitely more satisfying than any business acquisition. His empire continued to grow, but its purpose had fundamentally changed, from accumulating wealth to creating opportunities. As they left the courthouse together, Aurora reflected on the journey from that cold December morning to this moment of justice and hope. She was no longer the frightened child seeking shelter, nor was Khalid the callous billionaire concerned only with profit. They had become something new, partners in proving that every person deserves the chance to discover their potential, that society grows stronger when it nurtures rather than overlooks its most vulnerable members, and that sometimes the smallest acts of recognition can generate the most profound transformations. The street child had saved the billionaire's empire, but together, They had built something far more valuable, a legacy of hope that would continue expanding long after their own story had ended. Their greatest translation had been converting suffering into service, transforming a moment of cruelty into a lifetime of compassion. If Aurora's story moved you, remember that intelligence and potential exist in unexpected places all around us. Every day, there are children whose circumstances mask their capabilities, adults whose dreams have been deferred by systematic barriers, and communities whose contributions go unrecognized. You don't need to be a billionaire to make a difference. You can mentor a child, support educational programs in underserved communities, advocate for inclusive policies in your workplace, or simply choose to see potential where others see problems. The next Aurora might be the child in your neighborhood who asks thoughtful questions, the student in your local school who thinks differently, or the young person working multiple jobs while pursuing education. Recognition costs nothing but can change everything.